If the water stopped flowing in your home tonight, you wouldn't die immediately. You'd die 3 days later from decisions you made in the first 6 hours. That's the part nobody understands. People imagine dehydration as a slow, obvious problem. They picture cracked lips, dizziness, weakness, creeping in over time. But that's not how real collapses work. Real collapses punish early assumptions, not late suffering. And here's the mistake almost everyone makes. They think leaving the city buys them time. It feels logical. Space feels like safety. Distance feels like control. But in real disasters, that decision has killed more people than staying put. We've already watched this play out. During the siege of Mariupol, parts of the city lost running water within days, pipes destroyed, pumping stations offline, reservoirs inaccessible. Yet hospitals, emergency distribution points, and dense residential zones received water first, not because they were safer, but because they were visible, concentrated, and logistically efficient. During the Texas power grid failure, suburban neighborhoods lost water pressure for days longer than urban cores. Water towers drained. Backup pumps failed. And refilling them required fuel, pressure, and coordination that never arrived on time. And in Syria's prolonged water shutdowns, entire towns collapsed faster than nearby cities. Not because they were targeted, but because they lacked redundancy. One system failed, and there was nothing behind it. When water systems fail, they don't collapse evenly. They fail in a specific order. And that order quietly decides who finds water, who waits too long, and who never recovers. In the next 72 hours, urban density creates advantages most people never expect. Suburban space creates risks most people never plan for. And if you choose the wrong strategy early, no amount of preparation saves you later. Let me show you exactly how fast normal life disappears, and why where you live matters far less than what you do when the water stops. 3:17 a.m. Tuesday morning. SCADA systems controlling 3 regional water treatment facilities receive malicious code. Not a bomb, not a breach, no explosions. Just lines of software that overload control logic, corrupt sensor feedback, and lock operators out of manual overrides. Within minutes, automated shutdown protocols trigger across the network. 8 million people lose their water supply without a single sound. Backup generators engage automatically. Diesel engines roar to life in secured facilities across the region. But backup power is not backup water. Those generators carry fuel for 24 to 72 hours, depending on load. After that, the pumps go dark. Valves freeze in their last position. Pressure dies. Sarah Chen lives on the 26th floor of a Manhattan apartment building. David Martinez owns a split-level home in a quiet suburb 40 miles out. Neither of them knows what just happened. But physics already does. Here's the brutal math nobody explains. High-rise buildings lose water pressure first. When pumps fail, gravity-fed systems continue working only until rooftop tanks empty. Those tanks hold maybe 12 hours of water at normal consumption. Sarah's building serves 48 apartments from a single tank. David's suburban home connects to a municipal water tower serving 1,500 homes. The tower holds 800,000 gallons. Sounds like David has the advantage. He doesn't, because consumption is no longer normal. When people panic, water usage spikes 15 times above baseline. Bathtubs filled, laundry started, sinks left running, just in case. That suburban tower empties in 18 hours instead of the planned 5 days. But Sarah's building has something David's suburb doesn't. Density creates information networks that suburbs can't match. By 7 a.m., Sarah knows something is wrong. Her neighbor works night security. He was awake when the building manager received a partial alert from the city. Pressure restoration would happen 1 floor at a time for 1 hour per floor, while they rationed what little capacity remained. When it's her floor's turn, Sarah fills every container she owns. Bottles, cooking pots, old sports drink jugs, 3 gallons total. It doesn't feel like much, but she has them. David discovers the problem in the shower. The water stops mid-rinse. No warning. No announcement. No manager coordinating a response. He checks the sinks, the toilets. Nothing. He assumes it's temporary. He drives to the supermarket and buys 2 cases of bottled water. Normal prices. Normal shelves. Because suburban stores haven't been hit yet. And this is where the psychology gets dangerous. David feels prepared. Sarah feels scared. Guess who survives longer? Fear drives Sarah out the door. By 9 a.m., she walks to the bodega on Columbus. 6 bottles cost $12. They cost 3 yesterday. Surge pricing has already begun, not because the owner is cruel, but because he understands supply curves. His distributor called at dawn. No deliveries today. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe next week. David's confidence keeps him at normal consumption. His family uses 8 bottles by noon, cooking, cleaning, drinking, living like nothing has changed. The suburban infrastructure that makes his life comfortable is designed for abundance, not scarcity. Here's the first lesson most people get wrong. Urban density creates information advantages that outweigh resource disadvantages. Sarah learns about the crisis 6 hours before David does. 6 hours that decide whether you're buying water or fighting over it. But there's something else happening now. Something neither Sarah nor David understands yet. Something about human behavior that emergency planners consistently underestimate. Stop and think for a second. If your water stopped flowing right now, what would you do first? Most people say they'd buy water. But from where? And how much? And what happens when everyone else has the same idea at the same time? The answer reveals why suburbs aren't safer than cities. They're just dangerous in different ways. Part 4. The mathematics of triage. 60 hours without adequate water, and the crisis shows its real shape. Here's what nobody explains about infrastructure collapse. Systems don't just fail. They fail in priority order. Medical facilities first, then essential services, then commercial systems, then residential areas. But recovery happens in reverse. Government facilities first, then essential services, then commercial districts, then residential neighborhoods. Between failure and recovery is a gap, a window where everything is broken and nothing is being fixed yet. That gap is where people die. Sarah collapses on a park bench in the Bronx after walking 12 hours. She was trying to reach a FEMA distribution center. It ran out of supplies 30 minutes before she arrived. Someone calls emergency services. The ambulance takes her to a hospital treating dehydration cases in a converted gymnasium. The emergency department is already full. IV fluids, clean sheets, running water. The hospital's backup systems are still functioning. Emergency deliveries prioritize medical facilities. Sarah drinks more water in 4 hours than she consumed in the previous 2 days. But hospitals are temporary safety, not permanent solutions. They discharge patients as quickly as medically possible. Beds are needed. New cases keep arriving. Sarah has maybe 18 hours before she's released back into the same crisis she barely survived. The medical system can provide life support. It cannot provide life solutions. David's family never reaches safety. They're stuck on the highway for 8 hours, 12 miles, engines idling, fuel burning. His daughter's condition worsens. And this is where the early decision finally closes the trap. Leaving didn't buy time. It spent it. They get her to an emergency medical tent at a highway rest stop. Canvas walls, portable lighting, a handful of cots arranged on asphalt that still radiates daytime heat. The tent has water, but not much. Medical supplies, but not enough. And staff trained for trauma, not collapse. There's no capacity for intensive care, no dialysis, no long-term hydration protocols. David gives most of his remaining water to his daughter and his wife. It feels like the only possible choice, but it accelerates his own dehydration past the point where he can function as a decision maker. This is the hidden cost nobody plans for. When caregivers dehydrate first, families lose cognitive leadership before they lose physical mobility. The family needs help, but emergency systems don't triage families. They triage severity. The tent processes 30 to 40 cases per hour. Dehydration, kidney stress, cardiac events triggered by fluid loss. Medical staff work with supplies designed for highway accidents. Car crashes, broken bones, not mass dehydration across thousands of civilians. They can stabilize critical cases. They cannot treat the underlying scarcity causing the crisis. Here's the triage mathematics emergency management doesn't advertise. When systems fail simultaneously across large populations, Individual medical intervention becomes impossible to scale. The choice becomes brutal and mathematical. Save the people who can be stabilized quickly, or consume limited resources on fewer people who need more. There is no moral answer that changes the outcome. Sarah watches families make impossible calculations in the hospital gymnasium. Stay and hope. Emergency supplies arrive. Spend remaining energy traveling toward uncertain destinations. Split up so at least one person might reach help. Every option carries probabilities. No one can calculate with limited information and unlimited desperation. David's family faces the same equations at the highway rest stop. The nearest emergency shelter is 12 miles away. His daughter can't walk 12 miles. His wife shows moderate dehydration symptoms. David has maybe 6 hours of functional capacity left before confusion, dizziness, and decision paralysis set in. They need transportation assistance, but transport resources are prioritized for critical medical evacuations. The emergency systems that still function are making their own impossible choices. Available resources versus actual need produces ratios that simply don't work. 1 military water purification unit per 50,000 people. 1 FEMA distribution center per 200,000 people. 1 emergency medical facility per 500,000 people. Sarah learns from a hospital social worker that official evacuation priorities focus on vulnerable populations: elderly, disabled, families with very young children. Single adults in reasonable health are expected to shelter in place until services restore or arrange their own evacuation. The guidance assumes people have destinations in unaffected areas. Money for travel. Social networks beyond the crisis zone. For people whose entire lives exist inside the affected region, official advice translates to one sentence: wait and hope. Infrastructure repairs begin faster than initial projections. But faster doesn't mean fast enough. David's family receives similar guidance when emergency management announces the highway will close to civilian traffic. Military vehicles need clear corridors for supply delivery. Everyone stranded must move to designated shelters or find their own way away from the evacuation route. But the transportation needed to reach those shelters is the same transportation being redirected to military logistics. Civilians are expected to move themselves, using vehicles stuck in traffic, using fuel they no longer have, using physical energy already depleted by 60 hours of crisis survival. Here's where the urban versus suburban calculation changes completely. Neither environment has sustainable advantages once emergency systems hit capacity limits. Both depend on external supply lines that cannot scale to meet actual demand. Both compete for the same limited emergency resources. The difference becomes recovery timeline. Urban areas receive infrastructure repair priority because population density maximizes return on effort. Restoring water for 100,000 people per square mile produces better emergency yield than restoring water for 2,000 people spread across the same distance. Sarah's hospital social worker explains the projections. Manhattan. Water service restoration in 7 to 10 days. Repair crews can serve more people with less geographical movement. David's suburban area. 2 to 3 weeks. The same repair effort reaches fewer people across greater distance. This creates a feedback loop. Urban areas recover faster. They attract resources. They regain political and economic importance. Suburban areas lag. Their prolonged failure reduces urgency. They fall further down the priority list. Neither Sarah nor David chose where to live based on emergency recovery mathematics. They chose based on normal time logic, cost, space, commute, lifestyle. But crisis reveals what normal life hides. Location decisions made in stable times determine survival options in unstable ones. Sarah falls asleep in her hospital bed. She listens to helicopter rotors carrying emergency supplies somewhere beyond her window. Tomorrow, she'll find out whether that help reaches her location or passes overhead toward higher priority zones. David's family sleeps in their car beside the closed highway. They hear the same helicopters. They calculate whether tomorrow brings rescue or another day of impossible choices. Cities and suburbs follow different crisis timelines, but they reach the same endpoint: dependence on external systems that either function or don't, help that arrives or never does, and biological countdowns that give everyone the same amount of time before the body makes final decisions for them. What neither Sarah nor David understands yet is that the 72-hour timeline isn't just about individual survival. It's about something larger: something that determines whether any of them see day 4, 72 hours without water, and the mathematics become absolute. Here's the calculation nobody wants to make. When infrastructure fails simultaneously across millions of people, individual survival becomes statistically irrelevant. The question isn't who prepared better or who chose the better location. The question is whether the system itself can support human life at the scale of the affected population. Sarah is discharged Thursday morning. Instructions are simple. Return if symptoms worsen. But returning requires transportation and a facility that still has capacity when she arrives. The intervention that saved her life cannot be repeated indefinitely if the underlying resource collapse continues. She walks back toward Manhattan, 2 bottles of water from the hospital, a printed list of emergency distribution sites that might still have supplies, and no guarantee that any of them will still exist when she reaches them. Might. The uncertainty that has defined every decision for 3 days doesn't end on day 4. It simply becomes heavier. Plans still involve probabilities instead of outcomes, but now the body has less strength to execute them. Every choice costs more energy. Every mistake takes longer to recover from. David's family is moved from the highway rest stop to an emergency shelter inside a public school gymnasium 30 miles away. Cots in rows. Shared bathrooms. 1 meal per day. Emergency water is rationed at 1 gallon per person per day. That number isn't designed for comfort. It isn't designed for normal function. It's designed for biological minimums. Enough to prevent organ failure. Not enough to restore strength, clarity, or emotional stability. The shelter houses 400 people in a space designed for 200 students. Families are separated by hanging sheets. Personal belongings are limited to what people could carry when they arrived. No one knows when they can go home. No one knows whether home will still exist in any meaningful sense. Here's what the emergency shelter reveals about crisis mathematics. The infrastructure required to keep people alive is completely different from the infrastructure required to let them live. Emergency calories, emergency shelter, emergency water. Enough to delay death, not enough to maintain the social and economic systems people associate with normal existence. Sarah learns that Manhattan, below 14th Street, has restored water service. Repair crews started where density and critical infrastructure overlap. Financial district, major hospitals, government buildings. The recovery follows the same priority logic as failure, but in reverse. But restored water doesn't mean restored life. Grocery stores remain empty. Restaurants are closed. Most businesses are shut down. Supply chains are still broken. Staff can't return to work while dealing with their own housing and resource crises. David learns that suburban water restoration is projected at 3 to 4 weeks minimum. The specialized equipment required to rebuild SCADA systems is being allocated to urban zones first. The technical specialists capable of installing replacement control systems are working 20-hour shifts in priority areas. Suburban repairs wait in queue, not because they matter less, but because they serve fewer people per hour of expert labor. The economic calculation drives the political one. Emergency resources flow where they save the most lives and restore the most economic productivity in the shortest time. Urban density wins that calculation. But there's another equation that overrides both economics and politics: the psychological calculation, the one that determines whether people accept emergency conditions as temporary or reject them permanently. Sarah walks through restored Manhattan neighborhoods and notices something unsettling. The buildings have water, but they're mostly empty. People with places to go left during the crisis and haven't returned. People with money evacuated to hotels or relatives in unaffected regions. What remains is emergency infrastructure serving a population that can't afford to leave. The city that emerges from crisis isn't the same city that existed before. Geographically identical, demographically altered, economically reshaped. Recovery prioritizes infrastructure over population, efficiency over equity, restoration of function, not reconstruction of what existed before. David's suburban neighborhood undergoes its own version of sorting. Families with resources left early and will return when services are fully restored. Families without resources either stayed through the crisis or were relocated to shelters where they remain indefinitely. Homes with swimming pools and backup generators become informal hubs. The neighbors who shared water and electricity during the emergency form new, lasting alliances. Temporary survival networks solidify into permanent social structures. They decide who belongs, who is trusted, who is supported during the next disruption. Here's the final lesson about urban versus suburban survival. Neither environment protects people from infrastructure failure, but they shape what happens after systems begin working again. Urban areas recover faster, but change more completely. The population, economy, and social fabric that emerge bear little resemblance to what existed before. Recovery prioritizes function over familiarity. Suburban areas recover more slowly, but appear to change less. Many of the same social and economic networks return. Recovery prioritizes continuity over efficiency. Sarah finds herself in a city with running water but without the job, apartment, or social networks that defined her life before Tuesday morning. The crisis solved the immediate survival problem. It created permanent displacement from the life she had been living. David's family returns to their suburban home 6 weeks later. The house is intact. The neighborhood looks the same. But the relationships are different. The neighbors who shared water and food now share expectations, unspoken obligations, a new understanding of who can be relied on and who cannot. Neither Sarah nor David died during the 72 hours without water. Both survived the immediate collapse. Both reached infrastructure recovery. But survival and recovery do not equal restoration. Failure revealed how quickly normal existence can disappear. The crisis taught them that urban versus suburban isn't really about location. It's about which systems you depend on, which networks you belong to, and which priorities guide the people controlling resources when everything breaks. Sarah learned that urban density creates information and cooperation advantages, but only if you're part of the networks that share information and resources. David learned that suburban space and storage offer preparation advantages, but only if you prepare for the right scenarios and maintain community relationships that survive stress. Both learned that 72 hours without water isn't really about water. It's about discovering which parts of normal life rely on systems that can vanish overnight, and which rely on human relationships that either strengthen or fracture under pressure. The water returned. The infrastructure was repaired. Emergency systems eventually matched resources to need, but neither Sarah nor David returned to the life they were living before they learned how easily it could all stop. 3 days without water taught them something no checklist ever could: that the most important preparation isn't where you live or what you store. It's understanding which systems will fail first, which people will be prioritized, and whether the networks around you collapse or carry you when everything else does. It's understanding that the life you're living today exists because systems work that you never think about. Water treatment, pumping pressure, sensor feedback loops, delivery schedules, all invisible, all assumed, until they stop. And once you learn that lesson, you never fully forget it, even when the water flows again, 18 hours in, and the mathematics of panic take over. Here's what emergency planners consistently underestimate. Normal water consumption is predictable: 1 gallon per person per day to survive, 3 gallons for comfort. Panic consumption obeys a completely different logic. When people believe water might disappear, they don't store what they need. They store what they can carry, what they can afford, what they can grab before someone else does. David's neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, fills both bathtubs, her hot water heater, every container she owns. She's consumed maybe 1 gallon, but she's removed 60 gallons from circulation. Multiply that behavior by half the neighborhood. The municipal tower drains in 18 hours instead of 5 days. This is the hoarding cascade. It isn't driven by need. It's driven by the psychological demand for control. When everything feels uncontrollable, people grab tangible resources, and in doing so, they destroy the mathematical assumptions emergency systems rely on. Sarah's building manager began rationing at 6 a.m., but the damage had already occurred. Residents who received information first filled the most containers. Residents who slept late received whatever remained. Information timing becomes survival advantage. And timing depends on social networks most people never think about, until they need them. But here's where urban density creates a second advantage nobody talks about. Proximity forces cooperation. Suburban sprawl prevents it. Sarah discovers her upstairs neighbor filled his bathtub during the first pressure hour. 50 gallons. He's a single guy. He can't possibly use 50 gallons in 3 days. Sarah knocks on his door. She doesn't ask for charity. She proposes a trade. Her neighbor works at a pharmacy. He might have access to medical supplies. He has an infected cut that's already showing signs of redness. She needs water. They negotiate. 10 gallons of bathtub water for 5 days of antibiotic ointment and first aid supplies. Neither has everything they need. Both survive longer because proximity makes negotiation possible. David's suburban neighborhood can't replicate this. Homes are spread out. People don't know who needs what. Neighbors with swimming pools don't know who's running out of water. Neighbors with medical connections don't know who's getting sick. The space that provides privacy and comfort during normal times creates isolation during crisis. By Tuesday afternoon, grocery stores become war zones, but not equally. Urban stores get hit first and hardest. Dense populations, limited storage space, foot traffic instead of bulk transport. Suburban stores get hit later, but deeper. Suburban residents have cars. They can carry more. They can buy in bulk. Shelves don't just empty. They get stripped. Sarah takes the subway to Queens. She's thinking like most urban residents. Get out of the dense core. Find places with more space. Fewer people. She's 12 hours behind the curve. Suburban residents began hoarding Monday night when rumors first circulated. By Tuesday afternoon, suburban stores are more depleted than urban ones. The train is packed. People carrying empty containers. Coolers. Suitcases. Everyone has the same idea. Go where there's supposed to be more. But the suburbs are dealing with the same supply disruption, plus an influx of urban residents thinking the same thing. This is the second lesson emergency preparedness gets wrong. Geographic diversity doesn't create resource security. During simultaneous infrastructure failure, it just spreads competition across a wider area. David drives to 4 stores. The fourth has water. $40 per case. He buys 2. Burns a quarter tank of gas, getting there and back. The trip takes 3 hours in evacuation traffic. He's traded time, fuel, and money for 6 days of survival, assuming nothing changes. But everything is changing. The delivery trucks that restock those shelves are dealing with the same crisis. Drivers can't get to work. Routes are gridlocked. Distribution centers prioritize emergency services over commercial delivery. Sarah waits 3 hours in line at a Queens supermarket. Arguments escalate. Shoving starts. Security gives up. When she reaches the front, there's nothing left. 3 hours of walking. 3 hours of waiting. 0 water. Her urban mobility advantage just became a disadvantage because everyone else identified the same strategy. This is where the 72-hour timeline becomes decisive. After 24 hours without adequate hydration, cognitive performance drops. After 48 hours, decision-making becomes severely impaired. The brain is 73% water. When hydration falls, it shuts down non-essential processes to preserve core function. Sarah hasn't had enough water since Monday night. She rations carefully, small sips, long pauses, trying to outthink biology. But dehydration progresses on schedule regardless of strategy. Dark yellow urine. Constant dry mouth, headaches, foggy thinking. A physiological countdown that cannot be negotiated. David's family consumes supplies faster than planned. His daughter gets sick Tuesday afternoon. Dehydration, nausea from stress and heat while searching for supplies. Children dehydrate faster than adults. Higher metabolic rates, lower fluid reserves. They use 4 bottles in 2 hours to keep her stable. Now stop and think about your own situation. How much water is actually stored in your home right now? Not just bottled water. Your water heater, toilet tanks, ice maker lines. How long would that last? At crisis consumption rates, not normal ones? The difference between Sarah and David isn't urban versus suburban anymore. It's information networks versus isolated preparation, proximity trading versus hoarding, mobility advantages versus congestion traps. But there's a third factor, one that overwhelms both strategies, something that becomes obvious by day 3. But only if you survive long enough to see it. And once you do, you realize why most people never make it to day 4. 48 hours without water, and the hidden architecture of survival becomes visible. This is the point where outcomes start diverging permanently. Here's what separates the people who live from the people who die. It isn't preparation. It isn't location. It isn't how much water you stored. It's understanding which systems fail first and which systems fail last. Because infrastructure collapse is not uniform, it cascades. Sarah's building manager disappears Tuesday night. No updates. No coordination. But the hospital 3 blocks away still has water. Backup systems fed by emergency delivery trucks that prioritize medical facilities. Not because hospitals are safer, but because they are mission critical. The subway system is failing. Trains delayed. Lines shut down. But emergency services still respond to medical calls. Grocery stores are empty, shelves stripped, but FEMA distribution sites are being established at schools and community centers. The urban grid that looked fragile under normal conditions reveals layers of redundancy under stress. Multiple hospitals, multiple emergency services, multiple transportation routes, multiple communication channels. When one system fails, others still function. Not forever, but long enough to create windows of survival. Population density doesn't just strain systems. It also accelerates response. David's suburban area experiences cleaner failure modes. Fewer moving parts, simpler infrastructure, but far fewer backup options. When the municipal water tower runs dry, there's one replacement plan. Wait for emergency water delivery to the high school.